შეთანხმება იყო და ეხლა მოხერხდა და ცხადია საერთაშორისო ურთიერთობების პროგრამას და მამუკა კუდავას მინდა მადლობა გადაუხადო ამ საორგანიზაციო ძალისხმევისთვის, რომელიც ამისთვის იქნა გაღებული. Your Excellency, welcome. Thank you very much that you find time in your busy schedule to come back to our university. It took a while before we were able to match your calendar with our calendar. But anyway, so my thanks to you and great gratitude to you, and thanks to the International Relations Program, and especially to Mamuka who mediated in making this event happen. So we are welcome, and floor is yours. If Tico, okay. So otherwise, I'm leaving you in an interesting audience and good hands. Thank you.
Indeed. Thank you so much.
May I say?
Sure.
Thank you. I will briefly introduce the Turkish ambassador in Georgia. First, we met some 15 years ago, I remember, in NATO, and we're representing our own countries to push Georgia's membership. Was starting then, and since then Turkey has been very vocal in supporting Georgia in all fora, especially in NATO. Since then, Ambassador has done brilliant career in his own ministry, working as the head of policy planning. He's worked in the United States as well. And lastly, before coming to Georgia, he was speaker, press spokesman of Foreign Ministry, which is, as you well know, very important position in all ministries, especially in Turkey. And he kindly agreed to talk with us on recent events that happened in and around Turkey, elections as well as foreign policy, as well as Turkish-Georgia bilateral relations, crisis with Russia. But it's not limited to only that. As I told you, Mr. Ambassador has very big experience in many areas, being European integration, NATO, UN, United Nations, etc. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Mamuka, for this very kind introduction. Is it all right like that? Can you hear me? Good. Really, I mean, it's a great pleasure to be back at the Free University. I was here shortly after I arrived Georgia as ambassador in February 2014 to listen to Orhan Pamuk. That was the only lecture he gave in Georgia at the Free University, and that was my first introduction to Free University as well. And since then, although I wanted to come back so much to this wonderful university, it just didn't, unfortunately take place until my old friend Mamuka, gave me that opportunity. So I'm very pleased to be with you today. Now, I had a tour of the university, and I went back to my university years, and I really, thought, how good those years were. So, I'm sure, you're all dying to finish the university, graduate, and join the labor force yourselves. Of course, that is needed, and that's going to happen. But, try to enjoy as much as possible. You have an excellent university here, so, make most of every moment, every day in that good university. And I also love the name of this university, really, Free University. I think the founders of this university found an excellent name because, for me, universities are really, representatives, represent in my mind freedom of thought, freedom of speech, freedom of mind. So not only you do that in the work that you do, but you encapsulate it even in the name of the university. I think that is quite an important thing. So, I congratulate you all for being students at the Free University as well. I also would like to pay tribute to late Mr. Bendikidze. I had, the opportunity to meet him only very briefly in one meeting in the margins of one of his conferences, and unfortunately we couldn't meet again as he passed away. But of course, I heard a lot about him, how a visionary person he was, and the kind of contributions he made to Georgia, particularly in the last 10 to 15 years. So that also probably is a bit special, to be a student in a university founded by such a visionary person like Mr. Bendukidze, and I'm sure you will all try to step up to the standards he left for you, the heritage he left for you. Yes, Mamuka told that we are here to, I'm here to discuss the latest developments, regional developments in and around Turkey, like be it Syria, Russia, Ukraine, Turkish-Georgian relations. But I would, before going into that, I would like to put things in a bit of a wider context, both in times and scope. And I would like to take you a little bit back as to be able to understand why we are, facing these kind of developments as of now, and mostly very conflicting and very challenging developments in our region. In order to be able to understand the real dynamics at play here, maybe it's better to go back a little bit in time and see the evolution of this sort of international and regional systems as such. Because I believe one of the reasons why we are facing a crisis after crisis in this particular region, in this particular part of the world, is because we are lacking an effective international security system, an architecture, a working architecture, unfortunately. And that is one of the reasons why, of course, some of the crises are not related to each other in terms of tactical, at the tactical level, but in a more strategic level, I think there is a kind of a correlation among them regarding this lack of working and functional international security system. And in order to be able to understand that, I'm going to take you back to early 90s. Probably, except for a few professors I see, many of you were not even born by then. And then in 1990, I joined the Foreign Service. That also shows how old I am now, looking at you. But this is probably the time when the evolution, which brought us to this point in time, has started. Because, at the end of the Cold War, in 1990s, the very first years of 1990s, there was hope all around, everywhere. I then joined the Foreign Service, and I remember, writing my first speeches about Turkey and the new order, the region and its integration with the world, and this and that. We were really, full of hopes for future. We thought that, democracy has won over tyranny. And now, the international system would be a much better place to live. United Nations Security Council will work. All the organizations are going to cooperate with each other, together with the countries and such. There were this, democratic peace theory. There will be more democracies all around the world. And of course, as we have more democracies, there will be more peace, less conflict, and less wars. That was the kind of thinking that we had in mind. And I'm sure, Mamuka, you will remember the famous prophecy of Francis Fukuyama, the end of history. He said that, the end of history came with the, victory of liberal democracy. Now that is going to be the basis of, governance, global governance, and that's going to be the basis of the international system. That was all good, of course, but unfortunately, in a few years' time, many of our hopes were dashed, and miserably so. With the emergence of so many conventional and unconventional conflicts in different parts of the world, but first and foremost, at the heart of Europe, with Bosnia, the dissolution of the former Yugoslavia at that time, Kosovo wars and everything, that showed us that, stability, security, peace, and democracy are not automatically, emerging concepts. They need, constant nurturing, attention, and action when and if necessary, of course. So, that time really, was the 90s, particularly in the second half of 90s, were quite a bit of a challenging time in terms of showing us how unprepared we were, really. After the end of the Cold War, when we were looking at things very positively, but when we are faced with challenges, we really didn't know what to do in many of the cases. Of course, some of the good things also took place at that time. You will remember, of course, especially in Eastern Europe, many of the Eastern European countries, together with the Baltic states, joined, European Union and NATO. At least, we started, this process of, joining and membership to these organizations, and that was very good, of course. This enlargement policy of these two organizations, NATO and the EU, and the open door that they have kept, for these aspirant countries, were in fact quite an important element of transforming these countries in the positive direction. I know that Georgia is now also going through more or less the same process, and I think looking at the Eastern European countries and the Baltic states, you can see exactly how important this is to make most out of it and to benefit from that process. But still, overall, 90s were a time when we had, in our own terminology, like frozen conflicts. Like, weapons of mass destruction trafficking, organized crime, terrorism, and these kind of concepts, unfortunately, came to our terminology in the 90s. But more importantly, I think throughout this, first decade after the Cold War, we also lost sight of what is happening in different parts of the world. We focus so much on the Euro-Atlantic area, particularly in Europe. So as to expand this area of freedom and democracy and such. But we lost sight of the things happening in the greater Middle East area. North Africa, Middle East, all the way up to Afghanistan and Central Asian countries. And of course, we are, very starkly reminded of that fact in 9/11, 2001, when this, terrorists attacked in New York, the Twin Towers. Then we realized that, focusing only in Europe and trying to, agree on certain values and standards there is not enough. That security is indeed comprehensive in this global village. And that, we have to also pay attention to the other parts of the world as equally, as we are doing in Europe as well. And of course, immediately after this, tragic incident, there was a sharp shift of focus to Middle East. Then we went into Afghanistan under Article 5, the first time declared by NATO, and then the Iraqi campaign starting in 2003. Both were quite justified, really. Given the threats emanating from these two countries in particular, but from the region in general, I think the international community was justified in going and trying to intervene in the course of developments. But unfortunately, we didn't do a good job there either. Because of the weather, maybe it's so cold and cloudy, I'm being gloomy a bit at this point in time, but this is really the fact. Maybe we won the war on both occasions. We really, fought well militarily maybe, but then we were unable to win the peace and stability. We were not able to provide a sustainable environment for peace, security, and stability to flourish at that time. And that's mainly because, we didn't even have a post-operational planning when we were going into this sort of thing. We were not thinking comprehensively. We were not thinking in terms of, long-term ambitions and strategies in that regard. I'm mentioning these, because that these are the things that I'm going to bring myself to this, to our present times as well. But because of these things, that we didn't do good planning in advance, that we didn't think for the long haul, and we didn't really think comprehensively, that we focused on one or two countries, but in terms of democracy building, nation building, and state building, we really didn't look at the other, actors in the region. Unfortunately, what we have done, the kind of investment we did in terms of our human and capital resources, unfortunately, didn't produce the effect that we wanted to do. And again, another aspect is that, once we focused too much on these regions, like Iraq and Afghanistan, then we lost sight of what was happening behind in the Euro-Atlantic area. The same mistake, when we were focused so much on Europe, we lost sight of the other parts. And now when we focused on the other regions, then we lost sight of what was happening in the Euro-Atlantic region itself, but particularly in Russia, for example. The start of 2000s, the 21st century, when Mr. Putin came into power, what was happening in Russia? The kind of dissatisfaction of the Russian people, the kind of new rules of the game that they were trying to bring into the international society. We probably focused too much on the persons, from Yeltsin to Mr. Putin. But we lost sight of what was happening in the society, within the state itself. And I think the first wake-up call in that regard came in 2008. Of course, you know better than anyone else, during the Georgian-Russian war, when Russia occupied 20% of Georgia and Abkhazia and in Ossetia. In fact, the international community was given a very open and clear warning as to what is going wrong. We were already seeing signs of it, but then there was this very concrete, element that showed us that, we were really heading in the wrong direction. And maybe it was also an opportunity. As they always say, crisis always brings an opportunity with them. Maybe that was an opportunity for us to see what was going wrong and to make the necessary, corrections in that regard. That really international system failed to prevent such a blatant violation of international norms in Georgia. Georgia is not, in a remote part of the world. That is, in the eastern, southeastern flank of Europe, or maybe in the center of the Eurasian continent, which is going to be the future of the world, maybe. So, that was an opportunity for us to look at things in a more strategic way, in a more comprehensive way, but again, we failed to do so. We failed to, even respect the ceasefire agreements, the kind of, the deals that we agreed immediately after the conflict, and then we returned back to business as usual. And then two more things happened. Bear with me, I'm coming to the present time. I hope I'm not boring you too much. But then, what I call two twin earthquakes happened. The economic crisis in Europe and the West, and the Arab Spring in North Africa and the Middle Eastern regions. The economic crisis, in fact, particularly in Eurozone, in Europe, made whatever I was telling you even worse. Because we were lacking, a sense of strategic look. We were lacking a vision. We were lacking leadership on the part of those countries which are democratic, which are well advanced, which have the necessary resources in order to steer the international system in the right direction. Of course, many people were working and such. I'm not going to say that, I'm not blaming anyone, but I think because of the economic crisis, there was a sense of weakness in Europe in particular, which unfortunately led them to be a bit more inward-looking. They really lost, their sense of transformational power, particularly in the neighborhood regions. Again, Turkey and Georgia felt that very well, because we were at that time, you will remember, was very much working towards integration with the EU on the basis of common values, standards, and principles. But unfortunately, we didn't see the same enthusiasm from the West, from the European Union in that regard. And that is mostly because of this sort of sense of weakness because of the economic crisis. And in parallel with that, we also saw the rise of ultra-right tendencies all over Europe. The parties, the groups, the tendencies were making much more noise in Europe. We also seen Islamophobia rising in Europe, although that was completely illogical for a continent which was full of different people from different religions and cultures. But that was the reality. And unfortunately, that made the whole international system, the hopes for international system, even worse. That time was also, we also seen the rise of BRICS. Brasilia, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, for that matter, particularly in the economic field, which was a good development, in fact. Which was an opportunity. Maybe, that the world was going to become a multipolar world. We will have different, countries strong enough to make a difference in their regions and beyond. But unfortunately, those countries didn't have a common sense, again, of how the international system should work, how they should be able to contribute to that system either. So unfortunately, for the past 5 to 10 years, we lost, that sort of an opportunity, particularly after 2008 war, when we have seen very clearly what was going wrong in that regard. And Arab Spring, I don't know whether we can call it Arab Spring anymore or not, of course, because what is happening is no longer spring, unfortunately, but also became a victim of that as well. When people really, took the streets by, thousands and millions, wanting democracy, wanting to integrate with the rest of the world on the basis of certain common values and principles, unfortunately, the world couldn't help them in a very effective way. So these revolutions from Tunisia to Egypt, from Libya to Syria, couldn't even take off in the right manner. And what we have seen since then, Libya, of course, became a mess. Egypt, the democratically elected government was toppled by a coup, and now, I don't know how we can call the present regime there, but in Syria, of course, we have seen it very clearly how this whole thing can turn very bloody and very ugly in terms of terrorism, sectarianism, and all sorts of, these radicalist tendencies, getting a stronghold in that regard. And of course, again, what we have also seen in that period is that, I mean, not only the West or the European countries, I mean, were not able to steer the things in the right direction, but what we, think is the ultimate guarantor of global peace and security, which is the United Nations, was also becoming very ineffective. The kind of hopes we had in early 90s for the Security Council to work, for the countries to agree on certain measures and actions and such, proved to be completely wrong. Can you imagine a crisis like Syria, which caused, hundreds of thousands of people dying, millions of people being refugees or internally displaced persons? Humanitarian-wise, it's the biggest tragedy of probably of the last 50 years or so, and there is not even one single UN Security Council resolution on that issue, in terms of the political solution of that issue. There is only one resolution about the humanitarian assistance, and it's not implemented at all. We see it. And then came Ukraine in 2014. In 2014, when we are talking about, 21st century's promise and this and that, we have seen with our own clear eyes, an invasion of an independent sovereign country by one of its neighbors. Crimea was annexed. Eastern Ukraine is stabilized even as we speak, destabilized even as we speak. And unfortunately, the international community cannot, not only stop or reverse, but cannot even, control the situation as such. Again, we don't have any UN Security Council resolution. We don't have any consensus within the Organization of Security and Cooperation in Europe, OSCE, which was again thought to be the, organization of the post-Cold War Euro-Atlantic area. So apparently there is something wrong in that regard. The international community should really, sit back and look at this sort of evolution, what I was trying to explain to you since 90s, what is going wrong, and then probably need to come up with some new ideas as to how to make this international security environment more effective. And I think for that matter, first and foremost, it needs to be comprehensive. We cannot just look at one or two elements and ignore the rest. Security is comprehensive in two ways. One of them is geographically. In today's world, you cannot really think yourself that you're immune to what is happening in Papua New Guinea. No. Even Papua New Guinea might be quite crucial in terms of affecting the global security. So you have to have this kind of comprehensiveness, but also it has to be comprehensive in terms of its military, economic, political, social, and cultural aspects. You cannot just look at military means and military, sort of measures in order to rely a secure and stable system. That you have to have this full package. In fact, the OSCE was built on this, economic basket, political basket, and human rights basket. Again, we're losing that. There are certain countries which are not democracies at all, but we are dealing with them, in an easy way. There are certain countries who are in need of our help in order to, make moves in the. We are not doing that. So, again, a comprehensiveness in that regard. Secondly, I think it has to be value-based. It has to be principled. You cannot just do certain things in one country and completely do the others. There is no double standard. There is no room for double. Of course, double standards is unavoidable maybe, but to a certain extent. I think in some form of high ideals and values, I think we have to be very clear as to what we want for our next generations in the world and how we can cooperate at that. And thirdly, of course, I think it has to be cooperative. It has to be, it cannot be imposed by one or two countries. Every single country has to own that, has to have a buy-in in this system. Otherwise, sooner or later, we will see problems popping up here and there. So this is the kind of environment we are, unfortunately, today. And this is why we are seeing the invasion of Ukraine and the annexation of Crimea, why we are seeing the continuation of those frozen conflicts like Abkhazia and Ossetia, or Nagorno-Karabakh, or Transnistria. These are not frozen conflicts, but we are thinking that, if we confine them into their, small borders, maybe we will be immune from them. But unfortunately, that's not the case. Or why we are seeing all these calamities happening in the Middle East, but particularly in Syria. That there is all these, terrorist organizations rushing to this country and trying to find a stronghold there, sectarianism. within the same religion is unfortunately being more and more fomented. All these are because we don't have, unfortunately, a working international security architecture, working in the right direction, working with the right methodologies. So I think we need to see that. I think we need to be able to, not only look at things in their own merits, but then need to try to see the larger picture and then come up with certain solutions in that regard. One of the things, though, as part of this larger picture could be regional solutions and regional approaches. And that will bring me to maybe more about what we are doing with Georgia and together with Azerbaijan, the trilateral cooperation. Because I think in that world, and particularly in this part, in this region, what we are doing with Georgia, Turkey, Georgia, and Azerbaijan is exemplary, is miraculous even, really. Because we are proving to the rest of the world that cooperation is better than confrontation. And really, big or small countries can indeed agree on certain basic, common values and interests so that they can all benefit from it. There is really what we call win-win-win sort of approaches if there is a political will and if there is the right approaches. Turkey and Georgia, for example, are not really, in that matter, in that regard, only good friends or neighbors or two people having very historically special ties dating back in history, but we are also strategic partners. I think what we are doing together with Azerbaijan in particular in terms of energy, Bakü-Tbilisi-Ceyhan oil, Bakü-Tbilisi-Erzurum natural gas pipeline, which is now going to be expanded even further with Southern Gas Corridor, and what we are doing in transportation sector, not only the land routes from Turkey, Georgia, Azerbaijan, and Trans-Caspian, but now the railways. Just yesterday at 11 o'clock, it was a cold and sunny day. We have welcomed the first regular train service all the way from East China to Georgia in 7 days. And as of next year, when we complete what we call Bakü-Tbilisi-Kars railway, because there is a short gap between Georgia and Turkey in terms of railways. Once we do that, probably in the second half of next year, then we will have uninterrupted railway connection from all the way from Beijing to London. That is going to change the whole landscape, because now, in terms of railway connection, we're either dependent on the northern Russian route, or we can come only up to Georgia, and then we have to use the ships and such. So then that's going to also, create a very new element, new alternative into transportation. Of course, transportation means economy, trade, investments, and also, flow of ideas and people as well. So I think Turkey and Georgia are two countries, together with Azerbaijan, who understands the strategic stakes and work together. And that's why, in fact, for example, for us, Georgia is not an ordinary country. For us, Georgia's stability and security is as important as our own. Because, if there is this instability in Georgia, then we will be the first to suffer out of that. That's why we are very much supporting Georgia's NATO aspirations or the EU aspirations. In this EU aspirations, of course, we are a country who has been in the partnership or the association agreement for 60 years now. So we can only share our experience maybe with you in that regard. But definitely for NATO, for example, we are one of the most vocal and ardent supporters of Georgia in that regard. Because, we believe that, Georgia as a member of NATO will be more secure and stable. And thereby, of course, we will have more, some sort of reliability and predictability in terms of the very important projects that we are doing together with Georgia. So this is, maybe in a very small scale, what we are doing in the regional, scale is, in fact, showing to the entire world what needs to be done. How countries should cooperate with each other, and how countries should really, without targeting anyone in a negative way, how we can really create a potential, a larger political potential for the region. I know that, what I'm saying now maybe is somewhat very optimistic for you, given the larger challenges with Russia or Syria, but that is the way. You know, I think we have to do everything we can without really, you know, being too preoccupied as to what is the small contribution it makes. And I think Turkey, Georgia, and Azerbaijan in that regard is making a great effort, is making a great contribution in this regard. We are hoping that, Russia, for example, will see that. Also, they will see that, the countries, when they cooperate together, when they try to solve their differences with dialogue and cooperation, is in fact much better than trying to, benefit from confrontations. Being parts of the solutions is much better than being parts of the problems. For example, in Syria, for example, now what we see Russia doing there is unfortunately not helping us in any way to the solution of the conflict. On the contrary, it's making it more and more aggravated, more and more deteriorating. And we're hoping that, Russia will also understand that, what they are doing right now in Ukraine or in Georgia or in Syria might in fact seem like, good steps for the very immediate short term. But sooner or later, it will come back and haunt them. So I think, we're going to try to, have dialogue with our Russian counterparts on this basis, that, this region is ours. We're all here either to benefit together or to suffer together. So the decision is ours to make in that regard. And I'm not saying these kind of things, because we have this latest incident with Russia, because I think, although it is an important, a serious incident by itself, I don't think it is going to change too much in terms of either Turkey's foreign policy or Turkey's, sort of outlook vis-a-vis Russia. For us, Russia is also a very important neighbor, an important partner in this region, and they can make very important contribution to the stability and security of the region. But for that, we need to have a meaningful strategic dialogue with them. So in that regard, it's not going to change anything at all. I don't know whether that was what you were expecting from me. Maybe I remained too, abstract and strategic. But let me now stop here. Let me just, provide you the context of the discussion maybe, and then we'll have more, to the point discussion with your questions. Is that all right?
Thank you. Ambassador Levent Gumrukçu proved once more why he was appointed for several years as spokesman of the foreign ministry in Turkey. His oratorial skills were excellent. Your overview was very comprehensive, definitely, but that's why we are here to ask students, first of all, to reflect on them and putting questions on any subject, please.
And indeed, not only in terms of what I said, but I probably omitted the domestic situation in Turkey. If you are interested in any of the domestic developments, please also.
Thank you for your visit and for your interesting lecture. So I'm interested, what do you think about yesterday's accident? Russians opened fire on Turkish ship, So do you think that it will grow into a serious confrontation? Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I don't think that particular incident is going to get larger. No. I think we have already made first initial statements on our part that, first of all, our ship was not violating any sort of navigation rules. Secondly, I think the warning fires were really not directed against them. The captain of the ship said, they didn't even realize that they were being fired at or they were being fired for. So apparently it was not a serious incident as such. But, if that is any indication like if Russia is trying to provoke more tension between Turkey and Russia with certain incidents like that, of course, that might be a very dangerous development. We're hoping that this is not the case. Because, of course, that all started on 24th of November, when we shut down a Russian jet, when they violated our airspace. And since then, unfortunately, we have seen a very unhelpful reaction from the Russian side. accusing us for a deliberate act of aggression against Russia, or coming up with unilateral economic measures, and trying to also somewhat widen this tension by accusing Turkey with different sort of policies and such as well. But we are sure that, I mean, what has happened, of what has happened. What happened on this day is there were 2 Russian aircraft coming to our airspace, and the moment we realized that, I mean, their route was going to violate our airspace, and this sort of rapprochement period was about 5 minutes, we have warned these 2 aircraft 10 times. 5 minutes, 10 warnings. And we have tried every possible channel of frequency. And even a Dutch aircraft, commercial aircraft, the pilot even heard about those warnings while they were completely on a different altitude and on a different channel. But not only they didn't change their route, but they also not responded. So by the time we shut down the plane, we didn't even know the nationality of the plane. We were aware of an aircraft coming to our airspace, and in a completely hostile manner, without even responding to our calls and such. So what we did was not a deliberate act of aggression, but as an automatic response against our airspace violation. And for example, I mean, of course, we do not shoot down every plane when they mistakenly violate our airspace. No. I mean, Turkey is, of course, a huge country. We have different airspaces bordering with different countries. In Aegean, in the Black Sea, there are, time to time, airspace violations. I mean, this is almost, routine, in this part of the world. But, I mean, for Syria, we have a different set of rules of engagement. Because 2 years ago, one of Turkish jets were shot down by the Syrian air defense systems while we were flying over the Mediterranean along the Turkish-Syrian border. The Syrian side at that time claimed that Turkish jet has violated airspace, and they immediately take action by shooting down our plane. And since then, on a constant basis, those Syrian air defense systems from their territory is targeting our planes when they're flying on the Turkish side of the border and threatening them with shooting down. So that's why 2 years ago, we came up with new rules of engagement solely for Syrian-Turkish border. Because this territory for us proved to be very dangerous and hostile. So that's why we have told everyone, including the Russians, that we have a special rules of engagement because of this special nature. And in the beginning of October, when the Russians violated our airspace, when they first started their air operations in Syria, we have sat down with them. We had 5 high-level military meetings with the Russians, telling them why we had to adopt these rules of engagement and how we are going to implement them. So they knew from the very start that, there was this special rules of engagement, that they had to be careful, and unfortunately, they still violated our airspace. So I am hoping that, that they will come to understand that as well. And from the very first moment after the incident, all Turkey is doing, rather than escalating the crisis any further, we're trying to reach out to our Russian counterparts. We're inviting them to sit down with us, to allow us to explain them why this happened, how it happened, what happened. And then, agree on basic points. If we are, of course, mistaken, then we are ready to, of course, agree and acknowledge that. But we have all the radar pictures, satellite photographs, and audio recordings and everything. But now Russia is unfortunately avoiding that. But my common sense tells me that, given the importance of Turkey in the region, given the capabilities of Turkey, but also being a member of NATO as well, it is not in the interest of Russia to further escalate crisis with Turkey. Definitely not militarily, because, because of the Article 5, clause, and because of our membership in NATO, any sort of confrontation between Turkey and Russia might easily get to a larger scale. So that's why probably we won't see any action in that regard. And with respect to the economic measures, these are also very unfortunate, because in today's world, there is no dependence. There's always interdependence. Yes, maybe we import something, but they export something to us. and then maybe they sell something to us, you know, I mean, but maybe we buy something from them, but I mean, that means they're selling and they're, you know, I mean, benefiting from that as well. So we believe that, I mean, these economic measures, these unilateral sanctions adopted by Russia so far are hopefully the first reaction in the heat of the moment. And then they will soon understand that, I mean, taking this any further will not benefit to their government and to the people, to the Russian people as well. So all we have to do now is to be a bit more patient, is to show restraint on our side, not to, you know, I mean, fall into the provocations or not provoke anyone in that regard. We're hoping that sooner or later, Russia will also understand that, I mean, this incident, for whatever reason it happened, has to be brought to closure by talking, by engaging in a dialogue, and these unilateral measures and efforts to escalate the crisis is in no one's interest. Thank you so much. There is one question over there, I guess.
Yes, please.
Gentleman.
Can I make two questions in your language? Bugün Erdoğan'ın reytingi nasıldır? Ve Karabağ'da bir yeni savaş başlamak istiyor musun?
Good. Let me translate the questions, you know. Exactly. The first question is, I mean, about the domestic political situation and about our President Erdogan. What is his ratings like in Turkey? You know, I mean, President Erdogan is an elected president. You know, I mean, there was a popular election in 2014 August, and he won more than 50% of the votes. So, you know, that tells about the ratings and such. But in Turkey, we have a very strong state culture, really. You know, president, government, and different institutions and agencies of the government really work in tandem with each other, either within the government or in the parliament, or in the civil society for that matter. So, you know, I mean, rather than focusing on particular politicians' ratings and policies, I think you have to look at Turkey from a more institutional, from a more national point of view. And in that regard, we have a very, you know, I mean, consistent and predictable foreign and domestic policies. You know, for example, when it comes to our foreign policy, I mean, it has not changed much, you know, really. I mean, from the very start of the, you know, I mean, Turkish Republic. For example, the motto of Turkish Republic in 1920s, when it was first established in 1923, was given by Atatürk: peace at home, peace abroad. Because the idea behind that was, unless we have peace abroad in our region, it won't be possible to have peace in our own country, or vice versa. If Turkey does not have its own domestic peace, it won't be able to contribute to the peace in its environment, in its regions. Today, for example, there is yet another very, you know, I mean, catchy slogan about our Turkish foreign policy, especially with respect to our immediate neighborhood, is zero problems with neighbors, for example. I mean, many people can, you know, I mean, think whether this is possible or not, but this shows an orientation. This shows a vocation of a country that we want to solve our problems with neighbors. We want to have peace, security, and stability, a belt of peace and security and stability around ourselves. So, more or less, since 1920s, our foreign policy has not changed in terms of the basic contours, the basic premises of that has not changed. So, in that regard, I think in Turkey now, with respect to what is happening around Turkey, there are maybe some certain differences as to tactical steps between the opposition and the government. But I think overall, the Turkish government and the Turkish state has a very consistent policy as to try to solve our problems with our neighbors, try to contribute to the resolution of the crisis around ourselves, and also, you know, I mean, try to provide humanitarian assistance if we have the ability to do so. For example, in 1990s, we were on the receiving end of assistance. Our economy was not that strong at that time, and we were, you know, I mean, receiving assistance and credits and such from IMF to certain countries. But now, for example, because of the economic development of the last 10 years in particular, we have moved from number 25 to 17 in terms of world rankings, in terms of our economic magnitude, and also our GNP per capita was 12 years ago $3,500 or so. Now it's more than $10,000. So with this sort of economic development, we immediately started contributing to the development of other countries as well. Now Turkey is the first country in terms of humanitarian assistance ratio to its GNP, for example. So that is going to continue 10 years from now as well, because that is really something that is very much in our genes since the start of the Turkish Republic. So I don't think there's any problem in terms of these kind of things. The second question was whether I expect any further escalation of the crisis in Nagorno-Karabakh between Armenia and Azerbaijan. I hope not. I hope not. I mean, this is the last thing that we want, really, a renewal of the conflict, particularly the armed conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan. So we want this problem to be resolved peacefully and within the territorial integrity of Azerbaijan, but definitely through peaceful means, through political dialogue and such. Unfortunately, I mean, this is one of the, for example, the frozen conflicts that I mentioned. Since early 90s, 93, 94, I remember when I joined the Foreign Service, that was the major issue that we were dealing at that time, still the same. We haven't moved 1 inch closer to an agreement. Still, the ceasefire line is there. Still, on a daily basis, we are seeing violations of ceasefire on both sides. So that cannot be sustainable. We cannot expect this situation to continue forever. Sooner or later, something might happen. So for that, we don't want it, we don't expect it, but we cannot turn a blind eye to that possibility. And that's why I think we need to revitalize our efforts in order to solve this issue. Minsk Group, this is the framework where this Nagorno-Karabakh issue is being discussed and the efforts to resolve is pursued. Unfortunately, it's not effective at all. There are 3 co-chairs, Russia, US, and France, for maybe right reasons. But we have to enlarge the basis of country, the membership, or the number of countries who can contribute to that regard, and we have to come up with new ideas. And now is a good time. Now is a good time, especially now that we are seeing one conflict and after another erupting in different parts of this region. I think we don't have time on our side. I think we have to act even more quickly and swiftly. I'm glad that this Minsk Group co-chairs are now entertaining some new ideas. They are also, testing both sides, both Armenia and Azerbaijan in that regard. I understand there will be a meeting at the summit level between President Aliyev and President Sarkisyan in the second half of this month, December. So we're hoping that everyone will realize that, we cannot just, bury our head into the sand and expect it to, resolve itself. That we have to really, pay more attention and more effort in that regard. So that's all I can say at this point in time. Please, first you and then you, maybe. I hope my English is very good.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, that you gave us such a great lecture about the history. And you started your lecture with telling us how great is this university's name, Free University, and that we students are free, should be free. And yeah. And my question is about freedom in Turkey. In Turkey, recently 2 journalists of Turkish Cumhuriyet Daily, Cumhuriyet, yes, they were arrested after they published the information and the photos how Turkish secret services are selling weapons to Syria. Do you think Turkish press is free enough? Thank you.
Thank you so much. This is one of the questions that I'm getting very frequently. And I did that, when I was a spokesperson as well. There are many ways that I can answer you. Whether with respect to statistics, whether there are, really a great number of journalists in jail because of their journalistic activities or not. Whether, the court cases against people here and there, whether they are justified for that matter or not. But, we can speak hours and hours about it. But I think one of the, best measure of media freedom is understood when you go into the country, when you look at the magazines, when you look at the different newspapers and their editorial policies. And in that matter, I will come to your specific question as such, but I mean, for your more general question, whether there is freedom of media in Turkey or not, I can very easily and comfortably say, yes, there is. Because when I was a spokesperson, I had the sad duty, I should say, of waking up around 6:30, 7 o'clock every morning and going through each and every daily journal, which takes me about an hour and a half or so. Can you imagine the agony and the torture it keeps me under, every day on a daily basis? And I can say that, I still do it because, I still get the press clippings to a great extent. And from that variety of newspapers, around 28, 29 newspapers we have on a national daily basis, you see all sorts of views. Pro-government, more pro-government, anti-government, completely anti-government, trying to be more objective. So, you have the full spectrum, in full vigor, broadcasting or printing whatever they think is of news value. And I don't really see any particular newspaper in that regard being sued or closed, particularly for their journalistic activities or editorial policies. For example, I was given at that time, 2 years ago, a list of 35 journalists. The International Committee of Journalists or so published a list of 35 journalists at that time that they are in jail. Turkish journalists are in jail. And I was, of course, quite offended by that. I said, what the hell is happening in Turkey? So let me look into that. And then I wanted a list of, I sent a list to the Justice Ministry, and I asked them to send me some more annotated, explanations as to each and every name on the list. And it turned out that, I think, except for 2 of them, all of them were in jails because of, stabbing someone, or because of, writing a check without, the necessary resources on the bank, for merely ordinary criminal activities. So, being a journalist, I don't think, should, make you immune from criminal activities. So when there is a criminal activity, it has to be, of course, sued, and it has to be. But with respect to what you have said, this is a very recent development, and this is particularly creating concerns maybe. These 2 journalists are not, of course, yet sentenced to anything. They are in a kind of a pre-trial detention. As the prosecutor made its own case to the court decided to keep these people in jail during the time of the proceedings. And you know what? You know who came out first against that particular decision of the court? It was our Prime Minister. The Prime Minister himself said that, I don't believe that these 2 journalists, although what they did is a legitimate, subject of criminal investigation, because we have some very clear laws as to the confidentiality of court cases, confidentiality of certain documents, and this and that. And when you violate that, it's quite natural that, there will be a sort of a court case against that. But, even the Prime Minister said in the very first instance that, he doesn't believe that, these people should be kept in jail. Their, proceedings could easily be done when they were out doing their jobs. And even in the jail, of course, they're still writing their articles on a daily basis, if I'm not wrong. So of course, that's not something that, I can comment more, because this is the decision of a court. And as here, and as in many other countries, there is the independence of judiciary. So you cannot really, maybe you can comment on it, but you cannot really do anything about the independence of judiciary in that regard. So I don't know whether this is a satisfactory answer as such, but really, in terms of the general, outlook of media, there is definitely, the freedom of expression and freedom of press. As to the certain cases, of course, one might look into them in more details, but in all these cases, it is the courts, the independent judiciary, making decisions, and the government or the parliament has nothing to do with them in that regard.
Öncelikle selamlıyorum Sayın Büyükelçi. Sorumsa şöyle olacak.
Again, I had to translate later on.
Bundan sonraki Türkiye-Rusya ilişkilerini merak ediyorum. Gerek Rusya tarafından bazı kararlar alındı. Gerek vizeli rejime geçiş hakta, gerekse ekonomik ilişkilerin hakta. Ve Türkiye'den buna bir açıklama gelmedi. Yani bundan sonra Türkiye'nin buna tavrı nasıl olacak? Yine eskisi gibi mi yoksa yeni kararların alınacak mı?
The question is about the future of Turkish-Russia relations, that Russia is taking unilateral measures, sanctions, and Turkey is not responding to these in the same manner, whether Turkey will continue to show restraint in the future or not. I believe we will continue to show restraint, because I mean, we don't believe that this is a helpful way of conducting our relations. Unfortunately, Russia has taken that road since the incident, but we're still hoping that, as I just mentioned in my very first, answer to the first question, that Russia will also see that these kind of, steps and measures are not in their interests either. Let's just have a look at this, economic aspect of our relationship. Yes, the total trade volume is around $31 billion US. 16 billion of that is our import of natural gas and oil from Russia, which is quite, sort of a dependent, picture in itself. Because I think 55% of our gas import, natural gas import is coming from Russia. But then again, as I told you, as we are buying gas from them, they are selling to us, and Turkey is their number 2 market in terms of natural gas export. After Germany, Turkey is the country where they sell the highest volume of natural gas from Russia. So I think they see very clearly that there is an interdependence in that regard, and that's why probably they have announced so far, of course, that energy issues is going to be kept out of the sanctions. So which is the right decision on the Russians' part. The rest of our economic trade volume, around 15 billion US dollars, we are exporting products of 6 billion and importing 9 billion US dollars from Russia. So, if we continue along this path, who's going to lose? We are both going to lose. So because I think the real trade is evenly divided between Turkey and Russia. So we believe that, this is not the way to go. This is not the direction to lead. So that's why we're going to show utmost restraint on our side. And we will continue to try to reach out to our Russian counterparts with an offer of dialogue. And whatever their grievances are, if it is about the incident as such, then we can easily discuss the incident based on technical data and such. If it is something more than that, now, of course, they started accusing Turkey for, supporting Daesh. We call Daesh this IS. We don't even call them IS because they have nothing to do with Islam at all. What they are doing is, in fact, completely against Islam. So we call them with another name called Daesh. But now they're accusing us either for supporting Daesh or for, buying oil produced from areas, controlled by Daesh, which is quite, baseless. Not only because 3 weeks ago, when President Putin was in Antalya to attend the G20 summit, he praised Turkey and President Erdogan and what we are doing in our region in very great, way. President Erdogan was the most honest politician in the world, that they are very good friends and such. And now, 3 weeks later, they are accusing us with all sorts of things. One would ask, where were you, 3 weeks ago then? So, I don't think they have any sort of, base in that regard. But even that, we are ready to discuss. We are ready to work on whatever evidence they provide. For example, they have provided, their defense ministry provided pictures of a convoy of oil tankers supposedly coming from Syria to Turkey, supposedly carrying oil produced by Daesh-controlled areas. A defense ministry of a country like Russia produced this as the evidence showing Turkey is buying Daesh oil. The next day, first Americans came up with, some satellite pictures showing that this incident, this convoy of oil tankers is not in Syria, but is in northern Iraq. So, I mean, first of all, that was not the truth. And the second day, the KRG, the Kurdish regional government of northern Iraq, came out and said, these oil tankers belong to us. We are, in a transparent and legitimate way, selling our oil to Turkey, through Turkey to the international markets. So, if this is this kind of evidences, then again, we are more than ready to discuss that with our Russian counterparts. But, of course, you know, I mean, all I'm saying is for the short term, for the foreseeable future, maybe. Because, I mean, if they continue along this path, and if they, you know, I mean, want to, you know, I mean, how should I say, damage the relationship in both ways, there is also a limit, of course, to what, to the restraint that we can show. But as of now, we're still hoping that our Russian counterparts, which again I say, which we see as a very important country in the region, a very important neighbor for us, and with a great potential to make some positive contributions to the region at large as well. So we're hoping that they will understand that and that we will come to a sort of a common point in that regard. There was a hand raised there, yes.
Mikrofon gelmedi hala.
It's just in and out.
Öncelikle merhaba. Arkadaşımızın sorduğu soruyla ilgili bir şey demek istiyorum yani.
How many of you speak Turkish here? I mean, why are you making me speak in English?
It's not-
You know, who needs translation there?
Mr. Ambassador, it was not staged, okay,
All
to
right,
show
all
you
right.
how great we
Definitely
are in
showing off
Turkish.
the Turkish ambassador with your Turkish and everything. But, wonderful, wonderful.
Arkadaşımızın sorduğu soruyla ilgili medya hakkında yani TV Bugün'ün ve Kanal Türk'ün kapatılma girişimi hakkında ve Samanyolu'nun frekanslarının silinmesi hakkında ne düşünüyorsunuz?
Yes, this is about two TV channels which have been whose managements, I mean, management of which were transferred to temporary managers. That's what happened in with respect to Rustavi too as well. Temporary managers by court order were appointed to these two companies, but not to the companies. I mean, two TV channels as a result of which, you know, stopped broadcasting. These two TV channels belong to a holding group. So they are not the only two activities that this holding, you know, I mean, pursues. They are a very large, you know, I mean, business company, conglomerate, if I may put it that way, which have activities in the mining field, in energy, in trade, and export, import, whatever. And some time ago, it has been some time, in fact, I mean, 2 years probably, that there was an investigation into this holding, into this company, whether they are money laundering and whether they are indirectly helping, you know, I mean, a terrorist organization, an illegal organization, an illegal crime organization, let me put it that way. And as a result of that, you know, certain other companies of that as well were put under this temporary, to the management of these temporary managers. So that was not an action per se against TV companies. That was an action against the general company, the business company, as a result of which all the, you know, I mean, sectoral elements to it, you know, be it in press or mining or elsewhere, are put under temporary managers. So again, I mean, I don't see really a direct relevance with that decision to the media freedom as such. And in fact, I mean, those, you know, I mean, journalists who were, you know, there are now continuing, you know, I mean, working in other journalism, you know, newspapers and such. So there was not any person immediately, you know, arrested because of working in a particular, you know, I mean, TV station or newspaper. So again, I mean, if you look at things in a more general sense, then I think you make more comparisons and you put things in a wider context. Maybe I have one more question, time for one more question. Let me have it.
Good day. Thank you for coming.
Well, finally.
You talked about very interesting subjects. I'm interested in, well, Turkey accepted about 1.6 or 1.8 million refugees, Syrian refugees.
Yes.
And Turkey has poured a lot of money into these refugees. It's like $5.5 billion. And since Turkey is trying to, you know, strengthen its economy and it has a lot of social problems like income inequality and so on and so forth. How is Turkey justifying pouring so much money in refugees, and how is it going to deal with the problems that may occur because of these refugees? And also, since these refugees are from Syria, they may have affiliation with ISIS, and is Turkey kind of working against it? And how is Turkey going to prevent terrorist activity in Turkey? Thank you.
Thank you so much for that question, because I mean, as I tried not to go into the details of specific issues, I omitted that. But I mean, thank you for reminding. Really, I mean, let me give you a few figures in that regard. I mean, over the last 4.5 years, we have received 2.3 million refugees, mainly from Syria. Just over 2 million people from Syria fled their country and came to Turkey. And around 300,000 people came from Iraq, more or less because of the same reasons, than this time fleeing away from Daesh controlled areas. And your figure is unfortunately outdated. So far, we have spent more than $8 billion for the accommodation, healthcare, education, and different needs of these 2.3 million people residing in Turkey. Around 220,000 of them are in camps, in refugee camps, along the border, closer to the Turkish-Syrian border, but the rest is unfortunately scattered all around Turkey, in different parts of Turkey, including Istanbul, Izmir, Ankara, the big cities, but even in smaller towns along the Black Sea as well. So, yes, of course, this creates an economic burden for us. There's no doubt about that. And nowadays, given the economic difficulties that we are all facing in our region, every penny counts, maybe. So, I mean, it's not easy for a country, even like Turkey, to spend more than $8 billion in such an unexpected crisis. But there is nothing we could have done differently. I mean, our Prime Minister said it probably a few days ago. If the whole thing started today, and if I know what is going to happen even 5 years from now, I will still open our doors to those people who are fleeing from violence, persecution, and repression. I think you call it cultural, but I think it's also very, the right in terms of the political sense of the view as well. That, I mean, you cannot really turn a blind eye to a crisis as such, especially if it's a humanitarian nature, and you cannot turn a blind eye to that. So, unfortunately, we had to do what we did. I think what didn't happen after that, so that was, quite, legitimized and justified. What didn't happen after that, Turkey shouldn't have been left alone to keep up with this crisis, or to address this crisis. For so many years, we have called upon our, partners, friends, and allies, particularly in the West, to share the burden with us, to share the responsibility with us. We said that, we are trying our best, but this crisis cannot be confined only to Turkey. Sooner or later, you will also feeling the negative impact of this crisis. Unfortunately, for many years, for about 4 years or so, it fell on deaf ears. They didn't listen to us. Only when this summer, particularly from the very first months of this year, but particularly in summer, when people in large numbers started migrating to Europe as well, through Greece, Serbia, Macedonia, Austria, Germany, then they realized that there is a problem there. And now, fortunately, we are having a better dialogue and a better cooperation with EU in particular in that respect, in terms of sharing the burden, sharing the responsibility. We had our first summit after 11 years with the EU countries. Prime Minister Davutoğlu was in Brussels 2 weeks ago. And there we agreed that, EU will provide 3 billion euros on an annual basis to Turkey in order for us to be able to cope with that problem in a more effective way. So that's a start. That's a good start. But then again, if you are to deal with only, again, that brings me to the comprehensiveness of the security. Again, if you only focus on the symptom of a much bigger and deeper crisis, because these people are not coming to Turkey and to the rest of the Europe for fun. They're not just bored in their countries and they want to go ahead and then do some sightseeing. because they are fleeing away from a very important crisis, which is now, I mean, having global repercussions in every sense. So unless we also focus on how to resolve the crisis in Syria, how to provide peace and stability to this country so that these people can go back to their homelands, unfortunately, this sort of cooperation will not be enough either. We cannot come up with resources every year to match these sort of immigration. So, you know, after, you know, I mean, a long delay, we now have a better cooperation with the EU in terms of the economic and financial aspects of this cooperation. But I think without really looking into the crisis which produces that sort of a problem, I don't think we might, you know, come. This is the same with Daesh, for example. I mean, you spoke about other sort of repercussions of that. One of them is, of course, I mean, terrorism. You know, and because of the crisis in Syria, we now have this barbaric terrorist organization called Daesh in Syria. And they are not only there, but I mean, they are attacking Turkey, France, you know, I mean, the other countries, and they're also sending their terrorists to the other countries. Again, you know, I mean, maybe militarily we are justified bombing those areas controlled by Daesh. And we need to do that as a means of priority maybe. But then, can you just sit back and, you know, enjoy? You know, I mean, can you think that, I mean, this is over? No. I mean, unless you solve the crisis in Syria, unless you fill the vacuum in Syria with something legitimate, with something that everyone can embrace, again, today Daesh, next day there will be another radical organization filling in the same vacuum. So this is the kind of, you know, I mean, measures, this is the kind of cooperation that we need to come up within the international community. Otherwise, economically, militarily, socially, politically, and culturally, we are doomed to respond to the crisis. Maybe, I mean, I will finish with that, you know, again, talking about Daesh and the importance of having a comprehensive view in fighting against that. Not only in Syria, of course, I mean, solving the crisis in Syria is good, but also you need to have even a larger perspective than that. And you need to ask the question, why so many people, thousands of them, from all different parts of the world, are joining such a barbaric organization in the prime of their youth? People are joining at 20 years, 22 years old, leaving everything behind and, you know, I mean, taking such an adventure. One has to question that as well. Why these people are not having any hopes for future in their host societies and ready to join such an organization. I mean, we need to see sociological, psychological, social, economic, and cultural aspects of it, and we need to deal with it as well. So far, unfortunately, I haven't heard anyone suffering from an attack by Daesh talking about these things. The immediate reaction is, we're going to bomb, you know, I mean, Raqqa. We're going to bomb northern Syria, which is good, but I mean, that doesn't take you, you know, long, unfortunately, unless you have this wider, comprehensive view. And I think that's a nice way to finish at where I started. Thank you so much for your patience.
Thank you.
Thank you.
დიდი მადლობა ყველას.
Didi Madloba, yes, I had to say something in Georgian as well. You know, I mean,